Good day, and welcome back. If you care about the Constitution, federal power, and how immigration enforcement intersects with basic rights, this is a moment you need to understand. Before we get into it, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you do not miss any breakdowns like this one, because these hearings matter more than most headlines suggest.
Senator Merkley. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much, Director Patel. And so as I understood it, you testified yesterday that you'd like to have another $1 billion added on to the FY25 level to do the additional work you'd like to do on drug interdiction, fentanyl in general, and anti-terrorism. And today you gave us a budget that requests cutting $500 million. Which is it? Do you want us to, what are you asking of this committee? To add funds, add $1 billion, or to cut $500 million?
Thank you, Senator. Appreciate the opportunity. What I'm asking for is that with more, I can simply do more. And I was giving examples of what more I could do. I can do the mission and am in support of the budget here. And I'm working with appropriators and you to fill the gaps.
So you support the budget presented that cuts $500 million, but you also support us adding $1 billion should we choose to do that?
Well, I can't not support the budget as proposed because then I would be supporting no budget.
Okay. Well, we've got those two options. We do look forward to further details from you about how you plan to modify the function of FBI on these different missions that you've highlighted today so that we can give it the appropriate consideration. Mm-hmm. Director Patel, you're familiar with the Fifth Amendment.
Yes, Senator.
And it is really the freedom clause of the United States. It was 4 years into being a nation when Congress and the states said, hey, we have to make sure that there's not an over-aggressive government in the future that deprives us of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. And you're familiar that that applies to all persons in the United States.
Yes, Senator.
So there's been a lot of concern about the several hundred immigrants who were swept off the streets of America and sent to El Salvador without due process. And does that concern you?
Senator, I'm not in a position to comment on whether or not they were given or not given due process or are supposed to be afforded due process. All the FBI did and all the FBI will continue to do is arrest those that have violated the law.
Okay, but to arrest, you have to investigate. Have you launched an investigation of this violation of the Freedom Clause of the U.S. Constitution?
Senator, I don't know that I agree with your characterization.
Well, that was my first question, whether or not you agree with the Fifth Amendment and are prepared to defend it. It is your job to investigate crimes.
Yes, I agree with the Fifth Amendment. I agree with the entire Constitution, and the men and women at the FBI decide.
So are you going to launch an investigation of the reported violation of the due process of several hundred individuals?
Again, Senator, it's not for me to call the balls and strikes on it. The men and women at the FBI who are trained to open investigations will make those calls.
So you have no influence over whether an investigation is opened?
I have influence over it, but you're asking me a constitutional question. I'm not a constitutional scholar.
Well, it's actually not it's a question also of law.
But your position is that every one of those individuals is by constitutional right afforded due process. I don't know the answer to that. I'm telling you.
You haven't read the Constitution?
It
says all persons.
I've got it right here, but what you're saying is that every single one of the illegals that was sent down to El Salvador is supposed to be given due process pursuant.
Yeah, that's what the Constitution says. It says no person.
It doesn't say that.
It does say no person. Yeah, I'll encourage you to read it because it's also been affirmed by the Supreme Court repeatedly. In the case of Miranda versus Arizona, held the right of all individuals, regardless of citizenship status, the Supreme Court in Reno versus Flores. I mean, but it's the plain language of the Constitution. It concerns me that you're not familiar with the core concept of due process applying to all persons as written in black and white in the Constitution.
As the first public defender who's ever served at the FBI as its director, I am more aware of due process than any predecessor in my seat. You are delineating between removal proceedings and criminal acts. My job is to investigate criminal acts. That's what we do.
You are aware that the Fifth Amendment refers to taking away liberty, and when people are arrested on the street, detained and sent out of the country, that their liberty has been taken away.
Senator, that is a constitutional question that you are asking me to answer. It's not for me to answer.
The question has already been answered by the Supreme Court that they're protected, therefore it's a violation of law, and it's your responsibility to open an investigation, and you're saying today you will not do so?
I am not the agency involved in removal proceedings. That is a different branch of government.
So if an agency other than the FBI violates the law and the Constitution, you will not investigate because it's a different agency?
I will investigate every violation of law.
Well, but you just said you're not investigating.
No. You and I are in disagreement on what is a violation of law. I have yet to hear from the Supreme Court your position as you have adjudicated it.
Well, very, very interesting, because the Supreme Court's been very clear, and I had heard you were trained in the law, so I expected maybe you would try to uphold it. You also took an oath to the Constitution.
Thank you for the reminder.
Well, it's important to remind you, since you're apparently unfamiliar with the very basics of the core protection of freedom in our Constitution.
What I am familiar with is protecting the American public, and that's what
Let me close with one question, Mr. Chairman. Will you make sure that due process in every action of the FBI is completely honored under your time as director?
Will I ensure that due process is followed?
Yes.
Under the Constitution?
Completely. Send that message throughout the FBI that due process must be followed, is constitutionally required. Make sure that it's done under your direction.
Sure.
Great. Thank you.
Senator Merkley.
Today on Capitol Hill, Senator Merkley confronted FBI Director Kash Patel in a tense exchange that revealed two very different views of government responsibility, one focused on enforcement, the other on constitutional limits. What began as a budget question quickly became a deeper debate about due process, the Fifth Amendment, and whether federal law enforcement has an obligation to investigate potential constitutional violations. Let us start with the money, because that is where the contradiction appeared. Just a day earlier, Director Patel told senators that with an additional $1 billion above current funding, the FBI could significantly expand efforts against fentanyl trafficking, drug interdiction, and terrorism. Yet today, the official budget proposal before Congress actually cuts roughly $500 million from the FBI's funding. Senator Merkley pressed him directly, which is it? Does the FBI want more money or less? Patel's response was careful and revealing. He said, in essence, that with more money, the FBI could do more, but that he still supports the proposed budget because rejecting it would mean supporting no budget at all. In Washington terms, that is a classic answer, but it leaves lawmakers with an unresolved question. Is this budget sufficient for the missions the FBI says are urgent or not? Now this is where the hearing took a sharper turn. Senator Merkley shifted from dollars to constitutional law, specifically the Fifth Amendment. He reminded the room that the Fifth Amendment protects all persons, not just citizens, from being deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. That phrase, all persons, is not accidental. It has been repeatedly affirmed by the Supreme Court over decades. The concern raised was serious. Hundreds of immigrants, according to reports, were arrested and sent to El Salvador without individualized due process hearings. Merkley asked a simple but powerful question. Does that concern you? Director Patel responded by narrowing the scope of his responsibility. He said the FBI arrests people who violate the law, and that he is not in a position to determine whether those individuals were afforded due process. That distinction matters because it reflects how federal agencies often divide responsibility, enforcement on one side, constitutional judgment on the other. But Merkley did not let it stop there. He pressed further, asking whether the FBI had launched any investigation into a potential violation of constitutional rights. Patel declined, saying he did not agree with the characterization and that trained agents decide whether investigations are opened. Here is the critical point viewers should understand. The Fifth Amendment is not optional. It is not conditional on citizenship. Courts have repeatedly ruled that due process applies to anyone physically present in the United States. That includes undocumented immigrants. When liberty is taken, through arrest, detention, or forced removal, constitutional protections are triggered. Merkley cited Supreme Court cases and even read the plain language of the Constitution aloud. He argued that this was not a theoretical question, it was settled law. From his perspective, if people were removed without due process, that is a violation of law, and investigating violations of law is literally the FBI's job. Director Patel pushed back by drawing a line between criminal investigations and immigration removal proceedings. He emphasized that he is not a constitutional scholar and that such determinations are not his role. At one point, he stated that as the first former public defender to serve as FBI director, he was deeply aware of due process concerns. That statement, however, only intensified the exchange. Merkley pointed out that liberty had been taken away, and therefore, due process was implicated regardless of whether the action was labeled civil or criminal. In the end, the senator concluded that Patel was effectively saying the FBI would not open an investigation into these removals. If you want more clear, fact-based breakdowns like this that go beyond the shouting and explain what is really happening, subscribe to the channel right now. These conversations shape policy long after the cameras turn off.